My name is Paul Gunter. I'm director of the Reactor Oversight Project for Beyond Nuclear. We're in Tacoma Park, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C. And we're here as a part of a symposium that's put on by the Alliance for a Green Economy here in Syracuse, New York. And our major concern is that the hard lessons of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear accident now a year ago is that nuclear accidents happen, and they happen even in highly technological societies with unforgiving consequences. And I think that what's important to understand here is that in times of national crisis or natural catastrophe, nuclear power is more of a liability than it will be an asset, and that's because it is inherently dangerous. And what we've seen with Fukushima and its example was that nuclear power plants rely upon electricity from the electrical grid for all their safety systems. And when the electrical grid fails, substantial safety margins are lost at nuclear power plants everywhere. As in Japan, it could happen here in the United States. And under conditions of the loss of off-site power and the loss of emergency power, which could happen either by a tsunami or it could happen by a fire or a tornado. There are any number of scenarios that could put a nuclear power plant in the same condition that Fukushima experienced. It's not just an earthquake and a tsunami. But in that loss of off-site power and loss of emergency power, you have this condition called station blackout. And what that means is that all of the cooling systems to the reactors are then lost. The uranium fuel starts to overheat and swell, and then that will overheat, core melt. In the process of this core melt, you generate large amounts of hydrogen. And what we saw at Fukushima was the detonation of hydrogen gas and a core melt, and now we have an accident that's a year old and still really out of control, particularly with regard to all the radiation that was released, not only into the atmosphere, but all around the northern hemisphere. So this is our concern.
Now, how do you go in and contain that damage that's done?
The only relevant protection is prevention. That's why we're here to say that nuclear power plants must be shut down. I mean, once the radiation is out, the cat's out of the bag, and it then begins this process of bio-magnifying, bio-accumulating, and our main concern right now is that food and particularly the marine food chain now is magnifying the radioactivity of cesium-137, strontium-90, all these very long-lived radioactive toxic hazards that will represent centuries of a biological hazard. Now they're moving and up through the food chain, biomagnifying, so that plankton is absorbing the radioactivity. Small fish, marine life, are then eating the plankton. Then bigger fish are eating the smaller fish, and then with each link in that food chain, the radioactivity is magnifying, and ultimately we are at the end of the food chain. This is not only happening in the marine environment, but it's also happening in all kinds of agricultural products in not only just Japan, but as we've noticed, there's radioactive fallout that's now being measured in flora and even in trace amounts in the food chain here in North America and across the Northern Hemisphere. And this is just adding, to the fallout that's come up through atomic weapons testing, previous nuclear accidents. And so, this is the legacy of nuclear power. It's not electricity. Electricity is but a fleeting byproduct. The real legacy of nuclear power is radiation and nuclear waste.